Hello, and welcome to this special encore presentation of Lands of Legend. I am author J.K. Knauss, and I'm going to be showing you just a few of the beautiful, exotic places in my epic novel, Seven Noble Knights. It takes place in medieval Spain. I feel justified in calling this presentation Lands of Legend because in the 10th century, as you can see in this wonderful map by Nuno Alexandre Vieira, that in the 10th century, Spain was made up of several different kingdoms. The largest was the Muslim Caliphate of Cordoba, which takes up all of the south here and these islands. The capital is Cordoba, the palace city of Medina al-Sahra, which we will see some photos of. The ancient capital of Toledo is in here, and the border town of Medina Celi, which is mentioned in the book. The county of Barcelona over here was part of France. This little section here was also dependent on France. It's called Ribagorza, which if I get to make a sequel to Seven Noble Knights, that will show up there. The Kingdom of Navarra was very important in the Middle Ages. It was often in making treaties with the surrounding kingdoms and breaking them. The Kingdom of Leon was much larger, encompassing all of this. This was a Christian kingdom, and it included the county of Castile. Castile would later become the most powerful force and become what we think of as Spanish culture. But for now, it's just part of the Kingdom of Leon. Here we have Salas, where the seven noble knights live, Barbadillo, which we will see, Burgos, the de facto capital of Castile, and Busto de Bureba, where the villainess lives. In the rest of Leon, we have Zamora, which is where the first scene takes place. And it's also where I live. So I get to brag a little bit. I live here. It's not always blessed with an enormous rainbow, but sometimes it is a very special place. In the context of the book, Zamora was very strategic and switched hands many times throughout the Middle Ages. Because of that extended conflict, it built up impressive fortifications, even by the time the first scene takes place, which is the summer of 974. You can see here that Zamora was built on an elevated rock plateau, and then walls were added up to that. It's kind of hard to see here, but we'll get to those. It is known as the well-walled La Bien Cercada. In this photo, you can see one of the most attractive surviving sections of the wall. The wall that my characters would have been looking at was built at the end of the 9th century, but none of that remains today. It probably looked a bit like this section with its towers and gates. And this is from one of the oldest parts that are still around today. It's from the mid-11th century. This door is wide enough for a typical car to pass through, and pass through they still do to this very day. The gate is known as the Puerta de Doña Urraca, at least in part because here you can see a very weathered sculpture, and people say that that is Doña Urraca, and that's her way of saying, this is my palace. Doña Urraca was a very important historical figure in Zamora, and her story is definitely worth telling, but it's for another day. So, imagine a gate like this in a stretch of wall like this. This is part of the 12th century wall, right at the edge of the rocky foundation, and the city has put a nice park here. This is what I imagined my characters staring at in the first chapter. Golden stones with red flecks atop this incredibly beautiful natural foundation. I'd like to read a portion of the first chapter. Gonzalo Gonzalez peered between the wild grasses where once had grown someone's grain. He had lain in the dampness for so long that his boiled leather backplate and metal mail were weighing him down. He measured each finger width of sunlight that revealed the golden stone walls of Zamora before him, while the stars faded overhead. He had long since lost his sense of amazement at the Moors' audacity. 300 of them had set up their camp and war machines before the city's main gate, which remained barricaded. He turned his face to see his uncle through the dewy stalks, and whispered, "Why can't we charge the Moors now, while they're still asleep in their tents?" "It's not the right time," Ruy Blasquez said through his teeth. A groan escaped Gonzalo's mouth. It never seemed to be the right time for Ruy Blasquez. Gonzalo, his 6 brothers, and 100 other knights had arrived at their vantage point in the dark. But they'd made no fire, set up no tents, done nothing to break the silence or the monotony for those hours. Even the birds that morning withheld their songs, waiting along with Gonzalo for something, anything, to happen. Gonzalo pulled at the tufts of grass, and wrapped leaves around his fingers, then plucked them out again, counting. It had been a summer, a winter, and most of a springtime since the city gates had opened. His stomach clenched to think of the innocent Christian people inside the walls. Had they roasted their dogs and horses, or gnawed on their boot leather? Had the rain been enough to heal their parched lips? At this point, Gonzalo witnesses some action and charges in to save the day, setting off the battle that liberates Zamora. I have a recording of me reading this entire scene available for viewing, and I will put a link to that in the description of this video. In the next chapter, everyone is in Burgos for the wedding. Ruy Blasquez is considered the liberator of Zamora, and as a reward the Count of Castile is giving him a beautiful young bride, Doña Alhambra. Very little from the time of the 7 noble knights remains in Burgos today. Here we can see one of the few remnants of the city wall, a triumphal gate, constructed especially for Emperor Charles V's tour through his new domains in the early 1500s. If you walk through it, you come to the Cathedral Plaza. Burgos Cathedral is a marvel of Gothic architecture. It was started in 1221, which is to say that next year is its 800th anniversary, and that even though it's been a cathedral here since time immemorial, it didn't look anything like this in the 10th century. Nevertheless, I found during my research for the wedding chapter that marriage was not yet a sacrament of the Catholic Church in the 10th century, so the ceremony would have been held outside the church door. While writing these scenes, I imagined this plaza filled with people. And when I visited Arcos de la Frontera, which is very far from Burgos, I noticed what looked like a magic circle right in front of their cathedral door. It's probably just a sundial or a directional compass, but to me it looked like the perfect place for Ruy Blasquez to say his vows to his less than enthusiastic bride, Doña Alhambra. The circle gets pretty crowded with jealousies, obligations, and suspicions. Now, a medieval wedding of this importance wouldn't have had the ceremony and then everyone went home. No, this wedding was a weeks-long affair. What else would people do? Well, there was music, proto-bullfights, and games. The river is below the city level now, but in the 10th century, the riverbank would have hosted many tents for the out-of-town guests to the wedding, as well as a particular regional specialty, which is described in the medieval sources. This is artist Ayol Pincus's interpretation of what I've translated as lancing the scaffold. As a test of manliness, a scaffold in the shape of a castle was assembled for the knights to run at with their weapons, to see if they could knock it down. This local custom plays an important role in the legend of 7 noble knights. There's a video of me reading excerpts about this game at the Harvard bookstore, and I will put links to that in the comments as well, the description. Here, I'll summarize for you that the men show off. Ruy Blasquez, the groom, tries and fails miserably, and then Alvar Sanchez, Alhambra's cousin, gets a great result, and everyone thinks he's won the day. In the end, however, Gonzalo, the youngest of the 7 noble knights, wins. And then Lambra says the unspeakable. She says, "By himself, Alvar is worth more than all the other knights together. And, if only he weren't my cousin, I wouldn't refuse him any token of my love." Doña Lambra's words are what set off all of the problems in 7 Noble Knights. What she says about Alvar being the best knight shows up in the 13th century Historia de España. The more sensationalistic comment about wanting to bed her cousin comes from the Chronicle of 1344, nearly 100 years later. I felt that I needed both statements to rile up Gonzalo Gonzalez to start the disastrous fight that Count of Castile has to intervene in before he sends everyone home. As part of the peacemaking process, the 7 brothers follow Lambra to her new holdings in Barbadillo. And I think this is the place I need to stop this video. The story will continue in part 2 of this special encore presentation.